Greetings, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the maiden episode of the Weekend WOOOOO. I thought I would take an opportunity to dust off some of the books and stories and things that are scattered around the library. Share with you some of the odd and unusual stories that I've encountered over time. I've always appreciated a good tale and a good story ever since a young child. So in keeping with the heritage and tradition of storytelling down through the ages, I thought we would try a little experiment. And based on the receptivity, we'll see if it goes any farther than here. So if you enjoy these types of accounts and tales and strange happenings, let me know in the comments and we will try to continue with a weekend episode. So tonight, let's explore a place of spectacular beauty, history, and folklore. The Green Mountain National Forest. Tonight, let's take a look at some of the mysteries of the Bennington Triangle. The nearly abandoned ghost towns of Somerset and Glastonbury are situated within the confines of the Green Mountain National Forest in southern Vermont. During the late 1800s, both settlements were very significant industrial hubs, playing host to the workers of the region's logging and mining communities. As these trades slowly migrated away from the area at the turn of the 20th century, so too did the people who compromised them. And by the outbreak of World War II, both towns had been unincorporated by the authorities due to their lack of inhabitants. With the shrinking population, it would be reasonable to assume that life would become much more peaceful for those that had chosen to remain. Sadly, quite the opposite would be true. With a series of bewildering incidents which resulted in the unexplained disappearances of at least 5 town folks in as many years. The first of these mystifying events occurred on the evening of November the 12th, 1945. A group of hunters visiting the region had spent the better part of the day up in the mountains looking for deer, and, having failed to find any, they were making their way back to camp along a path known as the Long Trail. When the visiting hunters had first arrived to town, they had asked around for a guide to help navigate the unfamiliar terrain. They eventually employed a man by the name of Midi Rivers. Midi was a local resident who had spent the better part of his 74 years hunting and fishing in the vast and sprawling forest which surrounded the region. He knew this area like the back of his hand. As the group closed in on their camp, Midi had suddenly and unexplainably increased his pace, disappearing into the undergrowth ahead of them. The hunters assumed that he had decided to walk on ahead in order to have a fire ready at the camp for their arrival. But when they eventually reached the destination, there was no fire waiting for them, and there was no Midi to be seen anywhere. As the minutes turned into hours, it became apparent that something had gone terribly wrong. Several of the hunters retraced their steps back to where they had lost sight of him, but they found nothing. No tracks, no backpack, no indication that he had ever left the trail. Extensive searches of the area with park rangers and bloodhounds yielded no clues as to his whereabouts, other than a single, solitary round of .30-06 ammunition, which had been left standing upright on a rock next to a small stream. No footprints or other indicators were ever found. The locals were completely bewildered by the disappearance of Midi Rivers. He had been a fixture and one of the most skilled and experienced hunters in the community. It seemed impossible to them that he could have become lost or disoriented in the environment that he knew so well. They were just beginning to come to terms with the loss when, suddenly, an equally mystifying incident occurred on the same trail just 12 months later. Paula Weldon was just 18 years old and a student at Bennington College. At approximately 4 p.m. on the 1st of December, 1946, she decided to go for a walk to clear her head after finishing her shift at the college food counter. She went back to her dormitory, grabbed a heavy red coat to protect herself from the cold, and headed up on the same long trail. Despite the gathering darkness of evening, she passed several people on the path. Many of them later remembered her distinctive red coat, including one lost hiker who had actually stopped to ask her for directions back to town. Also, while on her way, she encountered an elderly couple who were heading in the same direction and greeted them as she walked past. The couple watched as the young girl in the red coat and blue jeans disappeared from their sight up and around the bend, approximately 100 yards ahead of them. As they rounded the corner themselves a few moments later, they noticed that the path opened up into a large clearing, and they were surprised to discover that the girl was nowhere in sight. When Paula did not return for college the next day, the alarm was raised with the Vermont State Police. Assistance was also sought from law enforcement agencies in neighboring Massachusetts and New York. A search involving 600 volunteers and a $5,000 reward for information failed to turn up any evidence. Paula Weldon had simply vanished without a trace. As mystifying as the circumstances behind the previous two incidents were, they paled in comparison to the completely unexplainable disappearance of James Tedford, exactly 3 years to the day after Paula went missing. The Bennington resident had served in France during the First World War and now resided in a state of peaceful contentment at the local Veterans Hospital. On the day in question, the 68-year-old had been out to visit relatives in St. Albans and was returning home again on the bus. It was a normal and regular trip for Tedford, who had greeted the driver as he came on board before settling down with his luggage on the rear seat. When the bus eventually pulled into the depot later that night, Tedford was nowhere to be seen. The last time that anyone remembered seeing him had been as the bus departed from Arlington, which was the final stop before Bennington, and yet nobody had observed him getting up from where he was sitting or remembered him walking to the front of the bus. What's even more hauntingly disturbing was that his suitcase and coat were still placed neatly on the bus seat where he had left them. He nor his remains were ever seen or heard from again. On October the 12th the following year, 8-year-old Paul Jepson had climbed up into the family truck to go help feed pigs at the end of the family farm. After a short drive, his mother exited the vehicle, leaving Paul to watch from the passenger seat. As she tended to the pigs a short distance away, she occasionally glanced at him through the pickup truck window. Several minutes later, she was horrified to find that her son was nowhere to be seen, and she frantically searched the area where the truck was parked. Her screams could be heard by other family members all the way to the house as they came running to her aid. Once again, a massive manhunt was on, and this time the police were able to uncover something unusual in the way of a lead. After learning from their previous mistakes, a pack of bloodhounds was quickly brought to the scene where the truck had been parked. The dogs immediately caught a scent and led police in a straight line away from the vehicle toward a nearby crossroads. At this point, the dogs stopped, having lost the trail completely. Searchers began to penetrate the foliage near the crossroads, and then something suddenly dawned on them. They realized that the spot was just a stone's throw away from the same point of the long trail where Paula Weldon had disappeared. And, in another chilling coincidence, the missing child was also wearing a bright red coat at the time he vanished. The authorities didn't get too much time to dwell on these coincidences. A short 2 weeks later, they were once again engaged in a high-profile hunt for another missing person. A tourist named Freda Langer, who was camping, had gone out for a walk with her cousin Herbert, while leaving her husband back at the campsite for a rest. Later, after falling into some muddy water, she asked her cousin to wait for her while she went back to camp to change her clothes. An hour later, and quite enraged, Herbert stormed back to the campsite, demanding to know why Freda had left him standing out alone in the forest like an idiot. When it became clear that Freda had never returned to the camp, the call went out, and eventually a team of over 500 volunteers, assisted by helicopters and other search aircraft, spent the next week looking for her. But, in an all too familiar repeat, no trace of Freda was found at that time. What does set Freda Langer's story apart from the others is that her body was eventually found. In May of 1951, 7 months after she disappeared, her badly decomposed remains were found laying out in the open near Somerset Reservoir. No cause of death was ever determined, and no convincing explanation for how her body was found in an area which had been repeatedly searched by officers and sniffer dogs has ever been provided. So, if 5 disappearances in as many years wasn't enough suspicion, there are a number of weird factors which suggest that a common link of some kind was present in the cases. Perhaps the most obvious of these is the tiny area in which all the vanishings have occurred. While none of the victims appeared to have known each other, and they did vary widely in terms of age and gender, they all went missing during the winter months, and they also disappeared within a few yards of witnesses who should have been able to see what happened to them. All of the victims went missing at roughly the same time of day, early evening, and all within close proximity to the trail that they had disappeared from. These are main routes, all very used paths and trails that they vanished from, an area that's saturated by thousands of visitors and hunters. Hikers every year making it a preferred destination. So, all these boots on the ground makes all the more inexplicable as to why the remains have never been found. Several other disappearances have continued on there over recent years. The list continues to grow. As to the Bennington Triangle and those who have gone missing there, some believe that the area may be a point where the boundaries between different worlds intersect, allowing some people to unknowingly pass between alternate dimensions. The Native Americans who settled the region certainly believed this, refusing to even set foot on Glastonbury Mountain. They believe the mountain was cursed, and it is a point where the 4 wind spirits collided, locked in eternal struggle. Many stories were passed down of warriors who had been seen to disappear into invisible portals opening up in the ground beneath their feet and swallowing them whole. It is believed that the Unsterberg region of Austria contains a similar phenomena, and the fact that James Tedford literally vanished into thin air while riding on a bus full of passengers with witnesses does seem to lend credence to the concept. Another theory is that southern Vermont is a place of specific interest for visiting extraterrestrial entities. Like so many other regions of North America, such strange occurrences seem to go hand in hand with the missing. There have been numerous reports of mysterious lights seen in the skies above the triangle, with one witness reporting what they described as a flying silo hovering over the woods near Bennington in 1984. The Green Mountain region also reportedly comes with its own resident Bigfoot population, with groups of more than a dozen heard in the darkness, yelling, whooping, and making all sorts of sounds. During the early 19th century, a disturbing encounter was reported at Glastonbury. A group of stagecoach travelers, at the height of a torrential storm, found the road impassable due to flooding. As the group dismounted from their coach while trying to turn it around and go back the other way, they saw something come out of the tree line a short distance away. It was extremely large and covered in fur with two glowing white eyes. With a deafening roar, it approached and started pushing the carriage over, sending the terrified passengers fleeing down the road on foot. Reports of such a cryptid have persisted and grown in numbers over the years, and as recently as 2019, a motorist reported having seen a 7-foot-tall creature making its way along the slopes of Glastonbury Mountain. When he pulled over to get a closer look, he could see that it had long arms and was covered in black hair before it disappeared from view. Of course, it's always possible that the creature he described in this encounter was a black bear, and that they or other predatory animals may have been responsible for some of the missing victims in the stories that we've covered. It's also possible that those people may have gotten lost wandering around for a significant distance before tripping or falling, having an injury, and their bodies becoming concealed in the undergrowth. Over time, it would be nearly impossible to locate remains, especially if they have been scattered by smaller animals. Another consideration is the elemental realm being a possibility in some of these situations. Many stories have circulated of people hearing strange voices telling them to do bizarre acts or wander off in a certain direction. One individual that lived a primitive lifestyle out there repeatedly told stories when he came to town of hearing voices while in the woods, sometimes telling him to commit acts of murder and other unspeakable things. He was eventually committed to a psychiatric facility for examination, but mysteriously, he was never bothered by the voices again once he was removed from the woods. So far, we have explored a variety of tales and events that all seem to take place in a relatively small and focused area. These must be focal points where realities overlap and hyper-paranormal activity is more free to run about. Truly bizarre places like the Skinwalker Ranch, or the mysterious killings and disappearances in the Superstition Mountains. It's apparent that some truly bizarre places exist on this earth, which may not be limited to simply one aspect or dimension. The Bennington Triangle area has lessened in its occurrences over the years, but the numbers of disappearances are still concerning. Whatever force, entity, or being is responsible, it's still active and it's still out there. I hope everybody enjoyed our story time tonight. I appreciate you listening in. If you enjoy this, let me know in the comments. Hit the like, share, and subscribe. And we'll try this again. Have a great night, everyone.